This research intends to outline the importance of music in defining the social and cultural development of a country, showing at the same time all the benefits that it entails in fields such as communication, creativity, and social relations. Italian schools adopt inadequate approach to music nowadays, giving no importance to those skills children are supposed to develop during the compulsory school years, and avoiding all the benefits that interactive teaching could bring. Multitasking and interpersonal communication are fundamental requisite for any kind of job, and they can be taught by an increase in attendance to music lessons, given that human beings in their tender age can assimilate and learn so much faster than in their adulthood. A lot of music teachers use relaxation breathing exercise as a starting point in order to have a bearing on the nervous system and reduce muscular tension, increasing both attention and concentration. The empathetic listening encourages children to express their feelings and increases their openness. Besides increasing children's consciousness, it makes students more attentive. Positive outcomes of cooperative learning are highly evaluated in all age groups, but these can only be achieved through effective communication. The open-mindedness helps us to value and explore other traditions. Acting has bridged between different cultures. A survey conducted by Maya Mulma on music has ground for intercultural communication between Russia and Estonia points out that the tolerance towards another culture increases thanks to music, because it helps children to make a clearer picture of themselves, both at an external level and for their inner life. Music and language are, under an anthropologic point of view, social manifestation of one's culture and the product of all the interactions among group members. During the last century, the analogy between music and language has been strengthened by famous linguist Noam Chomsky and the musicologist Henry Schenker. They claim that every single man has the capability of creating abstract linguistic or musical representation because of two types of structure. The superficial structure is a consistent expression of sounds, in other words, a melodic phrasing, while the deep structure is the inner message, which in music is given by the constant arrangement of the composition, that reveal us the musical intuition nature. Dr. Charles Limb, Johns Hopkins University surgeon, investigated the perception of musical stimuli by the human brain by using a functional magnetic resonance imaging to track the brain activity of jazz musicians in the act of trading force. During the improvised exchanges, the parts of the brain that interpret the meaning of language were completely deactivated, whereas the areas of the brain linked to syntactic, that correspond to the rules of language, were activated. Another interesting study carried out in this field belongs to the neurologist Uri Arson, who studied the collective response of a group of people to stimuli induced by a song. During the execution of the song, the stimuli produced a collective cerebral activity among all the audience. To put it another way, an overlapping of the same brain areas was identified: the auditory cortex, which processes the information, and the thalamus, that is structure of the central nervous system. Some of whose functions are the relaying of sensory motor signals to the cerebral cortex and the regulation of consciousness, sleep, and alertness. Our own musical and emotional experience give rise to a unique socio-cultural phenomenon called musical thinking, whose main objective is to know and appreciate the musical work. It evolves according to the internal and external factors of the corresponding country, until it achieves a social cohesion that will result in a specific style of music. Every single historical period is the consequence of previous happenings, and it happens the same with music. Basically, jazz originates from the confluence of the African rhythm and the idealism of the Western world. This is a good example of how once a culture is integrated, it lasts deep-rooted for a very long time. The so-called plantation songs and work songs were sung by the slave, both to overcome their minority status and not to forget their identity, almost wiped out by the black coat. Free jazz, which came along with the human rights movement of 1960s, can be seen as a political phenomenon. The freedom of expression and the sense of rebellion fostered by Martin Luther King or Malcolm X changed sharply the way black musicians felt music. whose structure went beyond the usual harmonic rules, reaching even more free dimension. Charlie Haydn, the Coleman's bass player, formed the Liberation Music Orchestra and composed socio-political manifestos addressed to the movement for the black people liberation in the Portuguese colonies of Mozambique and Angola. In Brazil, bossa nova raised during the period of prosperity called desenvolvimento. The counter-revolution applied the coup d'état of March 31, 1964, expunged many of the constitutional rights, included freedom of press and political opinion. In the same year, Gilberto Gil, Caetano Veloso and Gal Costa performed in Bahia in a show called Nós, por exemplo, aimed at countering the dictatorship. This is the birth of tropicalism, a cultural movement widespread throughout the young people that enlightened all the problems Brazil was facing, raised awareness of the socio-economic situation of the country, but encompassed also moral and existential needs. Bossa Nova played a vital role during this period. On the one hand, it talked about the alienation of the medium class. On the other, it analyzed and elaborated indigenous musical structures and more articulate rhythms. In the crossover of African American race music to a growing white youth audience, the popularization of rock and roll involved both black performers, reaching a white audience and white performers appropriating African American music. Rock and roll appeared at a time when racial tensions in the United States were entering a new phase, with the beginnings of the civil rights movement for desegregation leading to the Supreme Court ruling that abolished the policy of separate but equal in 1954, but leaving a policy which would be extremely difficult to enforce in parts of the United States. At the beginning of the 19th century, gypsies, that have been the first and the main performers of flamenco, learned Andalusian folk music and they re-elaborated it, following the musical concept acquired from Moriscos, since they lived together unlawfully. Andalusian music, before the Muslim occupation, derived from the Greco-Roman culture, as testified in the Marshall and Juvenal's writings. Music is a way to prove our evolutionary process, and the past served as common point for civilization to overcome the culture. An adequate approach to music raised awareness of ourselves both culturally and emotionally, and entails several skills that help us to relate to other cultures. Music stimulates our brain and creates connections among people, acting as a catalyst for dialogue, given that sometimes is even more expressive than words.